Back in 2008, when I was Mayor of Usk, I joined the Civic Society for the first time, and the members there spoke very fondly of somebody with the initials ARW. And I, as I'm sure many of us, had never heard of Alfred Russel Wallace, nor indeed that he was born in Usk. His world-famous achievements as one of arguably the best scientists in the world, alongside Darwin, was unknown. And over the years, we got to learn more about him in Usk on the Civic Society. The anniversary of his death in 2013 gave us the idea that we should commemorate this man and his achievements. And in 2014, 7 years ago, this project indeed began. It's taken us that long to raise the money, but we are here today, and we're very, very fortunate to have with us some very famous people, some knowledgeable people about the man himself, Wallace. And also, we're very, very fortunate to have Felicity Crawley here today, an Usk resident, whose creation we are about to unveil. So it gives me pleasure on behalf of Usk and behalf of all of you to first of all introduce Dr. George Beccaloni, who is the director of the Wallace Correspondence Project and also chair of the Wallace Memorial Fund. George.
Thanks very much, Tony, and good morning to all of you. The Usk Civic Society asked me to talk for about 10 minutes about Wallace's life and work, and after that I'll hand over to Bill Bailey, who will unveil Felicity Crawley's striking new sculpture of the great man. So this is a sculpture of the only picture of a young Wallace, aged about 25. He looks pretty geeky, and he was. Although Wallace is not exactly a household name these days, he was actually one of the most famous people in the world when he died in 1913, aged 90. During his long life, he wrote more than 1,000 articles and 22 books on a wide range of subjects, and in these he made numerous important contributions.
Best laid plans.
Oh yeah.
After all, a rural community.
Well, reminder that we're in Wales.
Coming to see you in Cardiff, Bill.
Oh.
I think it was supposed to be last year, wasn't it?
Yes.
So,
eventually.
During his long life, he wrote about 1,000 articles and 22 books on a very wide range of subjects, including biology, geography, geology, anthropology, and even astrobiology, the study of life on other planets. His work on animal distribution resulted in the creation of a whole new field, evolutionary biogeography, and his work on evolution led to his independent discovery of evolution by natural selection, a theory he published jointly with Charles Darwin in 1858. Wallace was born in Kensington Cottage, now Kensington House, in Llanbaddock on the other side of the river to Usk town, on the 8th of January 1823. His parents were Thomas Vere and Mary Ann Wallace, a downwardly mobile middle-class English couple who had moved there from London a few years earlier in order to reduce their living costs. Wallace's father... Sorry?
Do you need somewhere to sit?
Wallace's father was a qualified solicitor. But he had never practiced and had been living off inherited wealth, which dwindled as his family grew. His father was of Scottish descent, reputedly of a line leading back to the great William Wallace. whilst his great-grandfather on his mother's side was twice mayor of Hartford. Wallace was the 8th of 9 children, 3 of whom did not survive till adulthood. 2 of his sisters, who died in infancy, are actually buried in Llanbaddock churchyard. Wallace lived in Llanbaddock until he was 5, and his later memories of the area were unsurprisingly fragmentary. He remembered fishermen in coracles on the Usk, and him scooping up small lampreys from the river in basins or old saucepans, which were cooked for supper. Other memories include roasting potatoes on a fire which his older brother made in the woods, and playing in the ruins of Usk Castle. In 1828, Wallace and his family left Usk and moved to Hertford, north of London, and it was there, at Hertford Grammar School, that he received his only formal education. In about 1835, Wallace's father was swindled out of his remaining assets, and the family fell on very hard times. Wallace was forced to leave school in March 1837, aged only 14, because his family could no longer afford the modest school fees. And shortly after, he went to work for his brother William as an apprentice land surveyor. Wallace and his brother would do such work for the next 6.5 years, roaming all over the countryside of southern England and Wales. In the autumn of 1841, the Wallace brothers moved to the Neath area, and it was there that Wallace's interest in natural history really began. It started because he wanted to be able to identify the plants he saw in the countryside whilst out surveying. He bought his first books on the subject and began to collect them, forming a collection of pressed specimens. A slump in the surveying business in 1843 led him to take a teaching job in Leicester, where he met another budding naturalist, Henry Walter Bates. Bates soon got Wallace passionate about collecting and studying insects, especially beetles. In 1845, Wallace moved back to Neath, and it was there that he first read Robert Chambers's controversial, anonymously published book called Vestiges of the Natural History of Creation, which argued that species had transmuted, or as we call it today, evolved, from earlier forms. The book was dismissed by the naturalists of the day as pure speculation, but Wallace became fascinated with the subject. In late 1847, early 1848, Wallace suggested to Bates that they travel to Brazil in order to collect specimens of insects, birds, and other animals, both for their private collections and to sell to collectors and museums in Europe. The main aim of the expedition, as far as Wallace was concerned, was to seek evidence for evolution and attempt to discover its mechanism, how it worked. Bates liked the idea, and the two men, at that time Wallace was 25 and Bates 23, set off by ship from Liverpool to Pereira, which is now called Belém, on the 26th of April 1848, arriving a month later. At first they worked as a team, but after a few months they apparently had a bit of a disagreement and split up to collect in different areas. Wallace centered his activities in the Middle Amazon and Rio Negro, drafting a map of this mighty river using the skills he had learnt as a land surveyor. Some years later, this was published by the Royal Geographical Society in London and proved accurate enough to become the standard map of the region for many years. In 1852, Wallace was in poor health and decided to return to Britain. However, 26 days into the voyage, disaster struck. The ship he was on caught fire and sank in the middle of the Atlantic, taking with it his irreplaceable notes and all the specimens he had collected during the previous 2 and most interesting years of his trip. Wallace and the crew struggled to survive in a pair of badly leaking lifeboats, but fortunately, after 10 days on the open sea, they were picked up by a leaky old cargo ship making its way back to England. The ship actually almost sank as it neared the British coast, and because the crew of Wallace's ship had doubled the size of the crew on board the rescue ship, they ran out of food halfway through the voyage and had to catch rats on board and eat them and lick the grease off the cooking pots in the galley. Wallace's agent in London had the good sense to insure his collections, but sadly for much less than what they were worth. A few days after getting back to England, Wallace vowed never to travel by sea again. But good resolutions soon fade, and 2 years later he was in Southeast Asia at the start of a 14,000-mile journey, collecting an exploration which would yield an extraordinary 126,000 biological specimens, including 5,000 species new to science. It was during this trip that Wallace made his greatest scientific discovery. In February 1858, while suffering from an attack of fever on the remote Indonesian island of Halmahera, in what is now Indonesia in the Moluccas, the idea of natural selection as a mechanism of evolutionary change suddenly occurred to him. As soon as he was able to, he wrote a detailed essay explaining this idea and sent it off to Charles Darwin, who he knew was interested in the subject of species transmutation. Darwin had actually sent word earlier through Wallace's agent Stevens that Darwin wanted specimens of domesticated ducks and things from the area because he was studying domesticated animals in the view of understanding the transmutation. So, unknown to Wallace, Darwin had in fact discovered natural selection about 20 years beforehand, but he had been procrastinating about publishing the idea, and he kept it very secret, apart from one or two of his closest friends. So Darwin, when he opened Wallace's packet with the covering letter and the essay, was absolutely horrified when he read it, and realized that Wallace had basically come up with the same idea. So he appealed to his friends, the famous geologist Charles Lyell and botanist Joseph Hooker, for advice on what to do. To cut a long story short, Lyell and Hooker decided to present Wallace's essay without asking Wallace's permission. Wallace, after all, was in what he called the Malay archipelago, but there was no reason why they couldn't have written him a letter saying, how astonishing, Mr. Darwin has had the same idea, but 20 years ago, can we publish it together with your essay? But they didn't do that.
No.
So they decided to publish his essay, along with some unpublished fragments from Darwin's writing on the subject, to a meeting of the Linnean Society of London on the 1st of July 1858. These documents were published a month later in the Society's journal as a co-authored academic paper, with Darwin listed as the first author. Even though Darwin's book On the Origin of Species was published 15 months later in November 1859, most people today mistakenly believe that the theory was first proposed in that book. Wallace returned to England in 1862 and spent the rest of his long life explaining, developing and defending the theory of natural selection, as well as working on a wide variety of other, sometimes controversial subjects. He was awarded numerous prestigious medals, plus the Order of Merit, which is the greatest honour that can be given to a civilian by the ruling British monarch, all for his independent discovery of natural selection. And by the end of his life, he was world famous. He died in Broadstone, Dorset, on the 7th of November 1913, and was buried there at the request of his family. In 1915, a marble portrait medallion of him was installed in Westminster Abbey, where Darwin is buried, next to the memorial of Darwin. Sadly, after his death, Wallace slipped into relative obscurity, and few today remember that natural selection isn't just Darwin's theory, but Wallace's as well. The sculpture which Bill will unveil today will serve as a reminder that this is Wallace's birthplace. Tomorrow, coincidentally, sees the 108th anniversary of Wallace's death, so the timing of this unveiling is very appropriate. Although there are hundreds of public sculptures of Darwin around the world, there are very few of Wallace. The only ones in the UK are a bust at the National Botanic Garden of Wales, a sculpture in Hertford, the medallion I mentioned in Westminster Abbey, and a life-size bronze statue in London's Natural History Museum, which my Wallace Memorial Fund raised the money for, and which was unveiled by Bill and David Attenborough in 2013.
Thank you.
There are also life-size statues of Wallace and his loyal assistant Ali in Singapore, and a gigantic bust of Wallace about 1.5 meters tall in Tangkoko Nature Reserve on the Indonesian island of Sulawesi. The Usk Civic Society has been working on this project since 2014, when Tony Kear was then chairman, and he spoke of his dream to see a memorial of Wallace in this square. Successive chairmen, Martin Evans and Shan Henshaw, continued the work energetically. During the past 7 years, many people have helped, too many to mention individually. It's fitting that Tony is once again chairman to see the project through. I would now like to hand over to Bill Bailey. He really needs no introduction, but I will mention that he is a passionate advocate for Wallace, and his 2-part BBC series Jungle Hero, which is currently available on BBC iPlayer if you want to see it.
That's very good.
His 2-part series has probably done more than anything else to make people around the world aware of Wallace. So, over to you, Bill.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sanitize the microphone, as is the rationale of the day. Hello everyone, good morning. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, distinguished guests, people of Usk. Hello. Yes, this is not something I've ever said before, I don't think. I've greeted an entire town of Usk. It's lovely to be in Wales. Lovely to be here with the passing sheep. Obviously, that was a little bonus. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you very much. Firstly, let's hear it for George Beccaloni. Thank you so much. Wonderful background. And really, it set the sort of the scene of Wallace and the way that he is seen around the world is extraordinary. And when I was thinking about what to say about this wonderful bust, which I have had a brief glimpse at, and that is that I was thinking about a quote about a sculpture, and the one that came to mind was, you have to create your own life. You have to carve it like a sculpture. And I thought this was particularly appropriate for Wallace, who really did carve out his own life. He came from quite humble beginnings. He didn't have the benefits of the social connections of Darwin or the membership of the Royal Society. Everything that he did by himself. And that's why I admire him so much. He's an extraordinarily courageous, resilient man. And it's a great honour to be here today on this little bit of history in this town of Usk. And perhaps I should mention a little bit about my history with Wallace, how I came to be involved with him over so many years. And that is that it's very much leading on what George said, and that is that when I was travelling in Indonesia some years ago on a birding trip, I was lent a book on birds called The Birds of Wallacea. And at that time, I only really knew the name of Wallace through the book, The Malay Archipelago, which I urge you all to read. It's a fantastic read, regardless of whether you're in Indonesia or not. It's a wonderful travelling companion. And The Birds of Wallacea was the book which was pertaining to the area we were in eastern Indonesia. And then I looked up the size of Wallacea. And Wallacea, the area in Indonesia which bears Wallace's name, is a vast tract of land and sea, about the size of Germany. And it struck me then, why is a man so revered in that part of the world, so known? His name is everywhere. There are statues, and there's graffiti. His book, The Malay Archipelago, is in all the bookshops in Indonesia. why is he not so revered back here? So when I came back, I then started my own voyage of discovery to find out about Wallace. And that, of course, led me to George and his partner Jan. And George, of course, has done more than anyone, perhaps, to collate a lot of Wallace's correspondence. He's done so much to restore his headstone, and through him I learned all about his amazing achievements. And I think there's three things really that I think I admire so much about him. I admire the fact that he never stopped being curious about the natural world. He was always interested in the wonders of nature, of beyond the earth, of science, of space and time. He embraced new ideas, he embraced progressive ideas. He was quite unusual for the time, and he never stopped being enthusiastic about the natural world. And I think that's what I love about him so much. That almost childlike wonder at the world in which we inhabit, it never waned throughout his entire long life. And then I think also that I admire his courage. I mean, I don't know if you know, but Wallace, I think George was touched on it a little bit, but Wallace set off. This particular bust, by the way, is the earliest photographic image we have of Wallace, when he was about 25. And he was about to set sail for South America on the first of his voyages of discovery. And after that, he travelled around Borneo, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, what we now know as Indonesia, but it was then known as the Malay Archipelago. And he went through enormous privations. I mean, you can imagine, it's hard enough. I've travelled in those areas, and it's tough. It's tough now with the benefits of air travel and phones and computers. He was doing that in the 1850s, very much on his own, with enormous amounts of courage. He was prone to leeches and heat and biting insects, but that didn't deter him in collecting and collating and chronicling his experiences with amazing detail. And it was that, on all those years of travel and years of study, which led him to this extraordinary moment in his life, what he calls the controlling incident of his life, the moment when he had this sort of epiphany, this kind of eureka moment, when it came to him, the mechanism for evolution, natural selection, which, as we know, Darwin had many, many years before, but hadn't published. So Wallace, this is what I love about him. Anyone else who discovered, imagine you were on holiday and you discovered the theory of evolution, right? You'd want to tell people about it and take the credit. But what did Wallace do? He just wrote a letter to Darwin. He just sent it to him and said, I think you might be interested in this. Darwin was absolutely shattered by this. He actually says, this had kind of, all his work had been smashed. That's what he's incredibly violent terms he used. But Wallace was not really about taking the credit. He just wanted to know. He just wanted to get the science out there, and that is what I admire about him so much. I know, and I've been in that situation. I've trekked through the jungles of Indonesia. It's really, really tough, and he did that for 8 years. So it's courage and his extraordinary resilience I greatly admire. And I think thirdly, what I really mostly admire about him is determination. He was an extraordinarily determined man who overcame all manner of obstacles and privations to really be one of the most prominent scientists, most prominent people in the world. By the end of the 19th century, he was one of the most famous people in the world. And he never gave up. He never let any of the obstacles get in his way. And he was, as Darwin said, courageous in the pursuit of science. And that, I think, is something which I think I take more from anything. I think the fact that he is a man who really used all of his resources, all of his skill and analytical thinking to come up with the theory, the greatest theory perhaps that has ever been found in the human mind. I think it was Richard Dawkins who said. So what I think was struck with me more than anything was the fact that his name wasn't known when I came back. I talked to people about Wallace, and you ask anyone about Wallace, they'll say Wallace and Gromit, they'll say Barnes Wallace, Wallace Simpson. You have to go down a long list of Wallaces before you get to Alfred Russel. And I just thought that was an injustice. I thought that was wrong. people of Usk. I thought a right had to be made here. I thought this man, he had to be brought back to public recognition. Such was the global nature of his work and his thoughts. And you know, and here's another thing. He was in his later works, he warned of the dangers of over-exploitation of the world's and the globe's resources. You know, he was perhaps one of the world's first environmentalists. If he was alive today, he would be a keynote speaker at COP26.
Yeah.
So I think it's only fitting that it should be here, that he is rightly celebrated, and this. And George and I, this has been our mission for many, many years, to get Wallace more into the public domain. And this wonderful sculpture by Felicity is a significant milestone on that road to greater public awareness and consciousness for Wallace. So it's great to see you all here. It's great that we're here celebrating such a great man. Thank you all so much. And I just want to mention that the source of that quote that I mentioned at the beginning, life, you create life, you carve it like a sculpture. I was delighted to find out that that was William Shatner who said that. In a rare moment of profundity, Captain Kirk himself, which is actually very appropriate, because what did he say? To boldly go where no man has gone before, which is exactly what Wallace did. So, it's it gives me enormous pleasure to be here and to reveal this wonderful sculpture. But before that, I believe there's going to be a special fanfare. So, I'll hand over to the band. Apparently this doesn't happen very often. All right? Oh, there we go. That's it. Get out, the fanfare all me. So I'll put it this way. Yeah. Okay. Well, the microphones run out. The batteries run down. But I'm still here. So, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, distinguished guests, people of Usk, it gives me enormous pleasure and it is a great honour to welcome back to Usk one of Usk's finest sons. Please welcome back Alfred Russel Wallace.
Yay.
Thank you, everybody. Well done.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of us, can I thank George and Bill for being here today. We have some presentations that we will make, but as ever with a project such as this, there are some thank yous to make. It has been 7 years in the making. And I would like to firstly thank Stella Collard, who's organised today's event. She's here, thank you. There have been successive chairman and committee members who have carried on this idea to today, but I would like to make a special thank to one of our newest members, Steve O'Brien. I don't know where he is, he's here somewhere over there, who has really single-handedly driven this to this point today. Peter.
Anyway.
I would like to thank also people who have given their time. Steve Hall from Ridgeway Contractors, who put this in. Chris Woodhull from Hook Mason Architects, Katie Churchill from Churchill Archaeology, Tracy Huxley from Usk Town Council, who handled all the paperwork for us as well. So, we have some presentations to make, and if I could call upon our president, Tom, to make the presentations.
Oh,
Tom.
Bill,
yes.
a presentation for you.
Oh, thank you
on
very
behalf
much.
of the Usk Civic Society.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you for coming. You have been an inspiration to everybody about Wallace, which
Oh.
is really excellent.
Thank you very much.
And lots of people have been working on it, but you've given it that extra joint of publicity,
Right.
even without doing the tango.
Even without the tango, yes. Well, thank you very much. Yes, there'll be no dancing this morning, but thank you very much. Christmas come early.
George.
Thank you.
George.
And Paul, presentations from the Civic Society.
Oh,
I've got another request to make.
A special presentation for our sculptor, Felicity Crawley.
You can stand up. She's a
yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so
It's
much.
a journal of the story of how we've got here today.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you very much indeed.
Oh.
That's great.
Thank you.